Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 44th video in our Master Series, the 14th video in our first phase processing, and the second video that we're speaking about effects. So in this video, first of all, in the last video we talked about the basic things your DAW can do and really see those as an effects because they can be huge tools that you will just have a lot of fun with and come up with some really wild ideas for doing some really cool things. The next thing is that your DAW itself, besides your DAW itself, tools that you can get or processors or plugins that you can get that will do those type of things in different ways. Any of the things that I talked about in the last video, from volume automation and panning automation and anything that we were talking about, or anything else that your DAW just does that you found some way to make an effect out of it, there are plugins that can do that, panning automation things, even simple ones, doing amplitude modulations and changes over time and things like that. Anything you can come up with that'll do things like that, plugins that are addressing the things we talked in the last video that might do it in some extreme way, look around a little bit because they've come out with some real wild ways to take real basic parameters and turn them into effects that we had talked about in the last video. So it's a really good idea for you to look around and check that out. The next thing we wanted to talk about is the next most basic effect that you're going to have on audio is a couple different things. There can be mic simulator things that can simulate other mics and things like that, or cabinets and things like that. Now, the actual using different mics to try to affect the audio, that is an option, and they do have some plugins like that. But one of the biggest tools you've got is cabinets. Even in my DAW, I've got this real simple cabinet plugin that's called Ampire. And this, I can choose from all kinds of different heads, and I can choose from all kinds of different cabinets to actually route the audio through. Now, they normally have some stomp boxes and things like that and effects on the actual heads themselves, but it's not so much that you're looking for, is the effect that it can have on the audio. Maybe not for the whole performance, maybe for one section or one chorus or one word that you just want to put it in this cabinet, that because it changes the whole texture of it. Because basically what it's trying to do is emulate it that it's going through some certain type of cabinet. And there's lots of different ones. Some of them you can put impulse responses in them and all kinds of things. Mic placement, some of them have some real elaborate configuration tools in them to really do something different with the sound. So that, for the most part, most of the time you're looking for a really good, we talked about in recording, your biggest concerns, get a good capture. Don't worry about all that other stuff you might do with it, putting the mic way over there and doing all this other stuff that you might do. You can do all kinds of things in effects later to change what was going on there, to make it sound like it was farther away. I mean, anything that we do in processing can affect that good capture you got. So once you got that good capture I was talking about, you can affect it in all kinds of different ways. This is a huge tool. One of the most basic tools you have is, these kind of cabinets, cabinet emulations, and it's like, they're great tools because you can sit there and you've got one word or one phrase that you'll just want to cut it out, put it onto a different track, and then, put it into a different amp, and, set the mic configuration up maybe a little bit different, and you might put some more, mess with the gains, input and output gains, whatever type of parameters they have on there. Sometimes, you start messing with this stuff on here, you're affecting the audio again, with some of these basic parameters just for this one section that is inherent in the cabinet. So it's almost like you're re-recording it through a cabinet that has its own parameters that are set on equalizers and all kinds of things to try to get it to sound like this that it was just for this one part recorded in this one cabinet you like. And there's tons of them. I've got all kinds of cabinet emulation, amp sims, and things like that, because sometimes they're really cool. You can do some really wild stuff with them. So there's a tons of free ones out there, and your DAW probably has one that has one in it, and you can get some other ones. Just check it out and look at it as that. You experiment around, take a small section of audio in a good vocal that you've got, and experiment taking a section of it and throwing it in different cabinets. The transition, or a transition going from one movement to another, that you might just want to put it into a cabinet. And fuss around. The chorus or the backing vocals might be in a different cabinet for a couple words to give some kind of effect, or you might have it in one part the guy goes, yeah, and it's coming through this cabinet. You've set it up to where it's coming through some cabinet with some head and some amplifier, some head and some cabinet, and some of the parameters that you can adjust on. Some of them are elaborate. They're huge tools and huge effects that can have a phenomenal impact on whatever you're trying to do. Also, you can do a whole performance through a cabinet that's going to give it a whole different flavor that is through this certain type of cabinet. It's going to affect the whole capture in some unique way. Does that make sense? So it's another one of the most basic tools you have as far as effects, and it's a huge effect. The other thing, in the same breath, is like, convolution reverbs. You can get like impulse responses that are emulations of cabinets, different cabinets, and with different mics at different distances, or all kinds of things that are just wild, because you can actually take that impulse response that they've captured to try to emulate some certain type of cabinet and some head that they've tried to emulate, so that it's in here, in your convolution reverb. You got to be real careful and try to get the response time down. So I recommend under probably about 50 milliseconds. Sometimes in music up to about 80 milliseconds, but basically stay under 100 milliseconds, or 80 milliseconds if you can, so you don't start adding a lot of reverberation and spatialization. You don't want so much of the reverberation and the effect of the room or something like that, like if you're using an impulse response when we do, spatialization as far as reverberations and things like that. You just want the effect of the cabinet. And the impulse responses you can get will actually go through your convolution reverb, and you can get millions of them to where it sounds like it's in a bathroom. Well, I'm not saying a bathroom, that's a different application, but any kind of head and amplifier that you can almost imagine that they've got, impulse responses from, that you can dig up and find, that can have a huge dramatic effect on their performance, and sometimes you just want to make it sound better, and the whole vocal is going to sound better coming through this cabinet. It just will, and it's because it's a really nice cabinet, and it's got really rich sounds and textures, and it's going to affect the vocal with that. And it's actually convolving that impulse response onto the vocal. So it's a very unique type of application that it's not so much describing it in exactly what it's do can get really technical, but I try to keep it real simple, because basically it's trying to get that texture that you're singing through that cabinet, or whatever instrument's coming through that cabinet. And it's not so much you're trying to get the spatialization of what that might sound in some certain room, is that you want to cut most of that off. You're just looking for the textures that it's going to give it. Does that make sense? It's going to give it different types of textures because it's trying to emulate the cabinet itself. It's trying to emulate the speakers. It's trying to emulate the mic distance from it, and positioning and all kinds of things, that it can have a really cool effect on whatever you're doing. And it doesn't have to be, over a whole performance. It can be for one little section, or it can be for a chorus or a verse or one word, or you can use it on the backing, vocals for, a little bit at the end word or something like that. All the backing vocals going along, and the end word is all through that one cabinet, all 3 or 4 guys that you had singing on it. There's a lots of different applications. the more you think about it, the more applications you can come up with. And it's not always a harsh effect, like it's going to have this really, then it sounds like this 1930s cabinet. It's not like that. It will just have a different effect. So, I mean, even if you affect it slightly, it'll catch the listener's ear. They'll be sitting there and all of a sudden they're listening going on, and all of a sudden, what? Wait a minute. The sound changed a little bit. It can grab their attention. As long as it's not grabbing their attention in a bad way, that if it grabs their attention on it's a little bit, it should sound a little bit different, and you do it in a good way to where it's a nice change, and sometimes not. Sometimes it's a drastic, nasty change, to grab the listener's ear. Bam! Whoa! That was all kind of wild, It's like, it depends on the application, but those are huge tools, and some of the most basic tools again for when you're talking about effects, and both of those are huge effects that are going to do some really cool stuff sometimes to the vocals or the guitar or the bass or the keyboards or the synth or the oboe, whatever that you're playing through. You can run it through there and it's going to change the sound and give it a unique texture and a unique sound because it's trying to emulate those different types of cabinets. So they are huge effects for you to experiment with. I suggest you check out some amp sims, and I suggest you check out some impulse responses of cabinets and things like that using some type of convolution reverb, and check it out on some of your stuff. Peace, self-love. I hope you enjoyed this video on effects, and I will see you in the next one.